We're going to talk about countdown timers in Bubble. I'm going to show how to build one, and we're going to talk about some of the plugin options. In fact, let's start with the plugin options. In Bubble, you basically got four options here. There's a free countdown timer. There's a zero code one. There's one called Simple Countdown. There's one called Graphical Countdown. The only one of these that I would recommend based on simple tests is the Simple Countdown one. I will show you why. Over here on this page we've got the various countdown timers we're using. This native timer here on top is the one that I've built from scratch. This one here is a free countdown timer, as you can see, as I tried to show, I tried to use it within a repeating group and it doesn't work. Another thing I don't like is this. The seconds does not have a leading zero on it. Now you can build it in using the same logic that I used to build it in here on the timer that I built, but it would be nice if it came with at least the option of a leading zero as a style choice, and it doesn't have that. In the same way that you can't build it in a group, you also can't build it, you can't build it into a repeating group, you also can't build it into a pop-up. So I tried to make it so that it would display in a pop-up, and it doesn't work. You just get the colon here. The zero code timer likewise did not work inside of a repeating group. The graphical countdown calculator did not work in a repeating group. It also has a specified size that's not adjustable, so I had to make the repeating group large, which I may not want to do in a real life setting. And you're also limited to 1 hour, so this 54 minutes and 48 seconds here, it should be 53. I think it should be 53. In any event, there should be a leading hours, but there isn't because it's capped, and this also doesn't work inside of a repeating group. So the only one that really works well is a simple countdown based on the simple test of does it work inside a repeating group. Repeating groups are kind of translucent in Bubble. They create problems sometimes because you can only partially see into them from the outside, and you can only partially access the outside from them. So whenever we're talking about a plugin, I like to test to see if it works well in a repeating group, and the simple countdown was the only one that really worked. So that's a quick review of the countdown timers. Now this simple countdown costs $3 a month or $7 to purchase, so you might want to do that. But the purpose of this exercise was to build a native countdown timer just using Bubble's tools from scratch, and that's what I'll show you how to do. Now I should say that Gabby from Coaching No Code Apps has a video on how to do a countdown timer. In fact, when I got stuck trying to figure out how to build one, I referred to hers, so you'll largely be seeing her technique, credit where it's due. Just doing a bit of a deeper dive into building it, because I also wanted to make a point about style, and I wanted to show how to get the leading zeros, which she does not do in her video. So again, in the seconds here, you can see there's a 0, 2, 0, 1, and not just a single digit without the zero in front of it, this is my preferred way to do it stylistically. So I wanted to show how to do that. So let's do it. We'll get out of here and go to a blank page, which I'll call countdown timer page. And just to show you the data that I'm working with, I've got something called fake auctions. My actual app has actual auctions. So I created the data type of fake auctions for illustrating this countdown timer. I just put 3 items in here, and the only fields that I built are, I'll show you the data types. Deadline, which is a date in the future that we're counting down towards. The item, which is a text just for the purpose of seeing what item we're talking about. Maybe an item that's being auctioned. And I also built a field called seconds, which I'm not going to show you how to use. But the idea here is Bubble kind of doesn't let you enter seconds. If we go here and try to modify the deadline, you can enter minutes, but you can't enter seconds after that. At least if there's a way to do it, I don't know how. So the workaround is you just create a field called seconds, make it a number under 60, and then you could just add that to the formula when you're calculating it. And that way, if you do it that way, you don't just end up well, I'll show you. You see how all the seconds here are synchronized. That's because the reference point is always a minute. But if you add seconds, then you can have countdown timers with different numbers of seconds on them. So that's the data we're working with, and we're going to build a repeating group because that, as I mentioned, is to me the true test of is it working? Does it work inside a repeating group? So we'll build a repeating group. We'll give it the type of fake auction. Within each one, I'm going to put a group within each cell. And it'll have the fake auction type of content. It's going to take it from the cell, and we'll just display an item. And then we'll display the countdown as a text, and this is where the logic is going to be. Now, one thing to notice, I mentioned I wanted to make a stylistic point. We'll do it here. The point I want to make is that if you're doing a countdown timer, you want the font to be a monospaced font. Monospaced means every character has an equal size, and when it comes to a countdown timer, that's important because the numbers keep changing, and if it's not a monospaced font, then the total width of this entire countdown clock is going to vary slightly as the numbers change. So it'll be jumping back and forth a little bit, and it's not a nice effect. So you definitely want to use a monospaced font. This one is, I think, Courier. There's a few choices. I'm not super happy with any of the monospaced fonts, but this one seems okay. And if I remember, I'll show you what happens if you don't use a monospaced font. So here I do want to use, let's start without the monospaced font so you could see how it works badly before I show you how it works nicely. We'll call this text countdown. And in order to get the logic, we are going to basically take the deadline from the data, right? The future date that we're counting down towards, and we're going to subtract the current date time. But you're going to run into problems because of the repeating group when you try to do straight up current date time. So let's start by taking the item's deadline, so the current parent group's fake auctions deadline minus current date time. So in theory, that should give you the amount of time between the deadline and now. We're going to want to format this as seconds to make it work. And to get, we're going to ignore days for now. We're going to assume this is in hours. This is at most a 24-hour clock. So hours, then colon, then minutes, then colon, then seconds is what we're going for. So to get hours from an item that's formatted as a number of seconds, we're going to divide by 3600, right? That's 60 times 60. because there are 3,600 seconds in an hour. Now that's not where this ends, because you're going to get a decimal if you do it this way. And we're going to want to round it, but we always want to be rounding down, right? So if our timer should be showing 6 hours and 55 minutes, we do not just want to round to the nearest whole number, because that'll round up to 7, which is not what we want. So the way to get it to always round down, and this is the trick that I learned from Gabby's video, is you subtract half, and then you round to 0 decimal places. And that should give you the hours. To get minutes, we will do something kind of similar. So the deadline minus current date time, formatted as seconds, and here we want to divide by 60 because we're going from seconds to minutes. But we don't just want to divide by 60, we also want mod 60. And this will give us seconds converted to minutes, but only the minutes in excess of the hour. And then we're going to do as we did before. In order to get the rounding to happen properly, we're going to subtract a half and round to 0. We'll do the same for seconds. And here we don't need to divide by anything to get to hours or minutes, but we do want the mod 60. And just to get it right, we'll subtract a half and round to 0. So this is what ought to work in theory. Let's see what happens in practice. Looks like nothing is happening. What did I do wrong? Well, I didn't pick a data source. So we're going to do a search for all the fake auction items and try again. So we get our items and we get our difference between the deadline and the current date time. And we can refresh and it updates upon refreshing, but it's not a countdown timer. So first pass approach, what if we you know what, it probably doesn't make sense for me to redo this whole thing. But one way to do it would be just every second to display the data. So general, do every second. If we were to do this, do every second, display the data in the we'll do it in the well, I guess this is the issue. You can't choose to display the data in the repeating group, and you can't pick out this group within the repeating group because it's within the repeating group. And like I said, repeating groups are like islands. They are semi-permeable, but you cannot just display data from the page into the repeating group. So that's why I was saying that the repeating group creates problems for doing the countdown timer in this particular way. So the way around this is to create a custom state, which I'll do on the page here. And this custom state will, we can delete all this. This custom state that we're creating will basically keep track of the current time in this custom state. So we can call this current time to distinguish from current date time, which is a primitive element. So we want this to be a date, and then we create a workflow so that every second we update the current date time. And just to test that this is working, we will build a clock here that just keeps track of the time. Let's make sure that's working. It's working, but we're not seeing the seconds, so we want to format this a little differently. So all we need to do is format it as, and if we choose this one, the seconds should display. And that is the current time, so it's working. So now what we need to do is to get the formula for the countdown timer here to reference this clock over here, instead of just referencing the current date time, which does not update. So we also want to change the style of this repeating group because it really annoys me to have the vertical scrolling type. Let's have the, let's make it a fixed number of cells, 4. Perfect. And now we change the formula here. Instead of current date time, we want to replace that with the custom state called current time. So we get that by going to countdown timer page, current time, and then we make the same change in the 2 other places. And now we have a countdown timer that updates. So the thing that's left to do is to handle the leading zeros. So if we wait for a minute for this to roll around, for the single digit second times to roll around, we will see that it is a single digit only. So you see there's no leading zero, and I don't like that, so we are going to implement a leading zero conditionally. So there's 2 ways we could do this. One is using the well-known conditional styling here, and if you're dealing just with hours, minutes, and seconds, I don't care if the hours have leading zeros or not, so I would just work on minutes and seconds, and you'd basically need 3 conditionals. One for when you calculate the number of minutes, and if it's less than 10, just repeat the entire formula and just add a 0, the digit 0 in front of the minutes figure. One same thing but for seconds, and you need a third condition for when both minutes and seconds are less than 10. So that's probably the most straightforward way to do it in terms of existing or well-known conditional formatting options. But there's an easier way to do it, and that is to use conditionals formatted as texts. And I forget who taught me to do that one, but it was a very good, very useful tip. So the idea being, you can insert a conditional into here and then assign text depending on whether it's true or false. So what we're going to do is the condition is going to be the minutes are less than 10, and the true condition will display as 0, and the false condition will display nothing. And that way you'll get the minutes to show 0 just when the minutes are less than 10, and the seconds to show 0 just when the seconds are less than 10. So let's do that. So we'll need to find where the minutes start, which is here. So in here, we're going to squeeze a condition. And actually, we may have to redo things a little bit. You know, it probably makes more sense if I just show you on the other page how I did it, rather than spend 10 minutes doing all the work here. So here under building a countdown timer, we'll go in here, and here is how I built out this logic. So this colon here is where we got up to the hours, and here there's a condition. Parent group's fake auctions deadline minus the building a countdown times current time. So this is just the deadline minus the current time, formatted as seconds divided by 60 mod 60, rounded to 0. So we just repeated the formula for getting the number of minutes, only here it's part of a conditional. So if that is less than 10, then we format this as text. And if the condition is yes, a 0 appears, and if the condition is no, then nothing appears. That's it. And then we did the same for seconds. So after we did this whole formula as part of the conditional, we do the formula again in order to display the number of minutes. And that ends here at the rounded to 0. And then we go into the seconds portion of this. And here, if the deadline minus the current time formatted as seconds mod 60 minus half rounded to 0 is less than 10, we do the same thing. We format as text, and if the conditional returns yes for less than 10, we enter this 0, and if it's no, we enter nothing. So that basically is it, and as a result, we get this countdown timer with the repeating zeros. Now I wanted to show you what happens as far as the style. So here we have one of my favorite fonts to use, Domine, but it's not a monospaced font. So if we see how the countdown timer actually works with this font, you'll see that it's moving slightly, especially as we transition to the 1. From the 0 to the 9, from the 2 to the 1, it's just jumping around a little bit, and that doesn't look very nice. So that's why I use a monospaced font. I actually made 2 for countdowns. And let's edit it just so I could see what the font is for sure. So the font that I used is Courier Prime size 18. Could probably stand to bold it to make it look a little more robust. And if we use that, then the jumpiness is going to stop. So we'll see as this transitions from 2 to 1 that it does not jump around. See, perfectly still. And that's it.